Just going to begin with a short story, like a time in my life where I didn't feel that the Muslim community stood up for me. I was a new Muslim. I was at De Anza College, Cupertino Community College. And in that class, it was international relations. So it was about 94. So we're just off the first Gulf War. I know sometimes they call it it has a different name, like, or the Arabian, like, or in the Arabian Peninsula, the Gulf. And at that time, so this is pre 9/11, but Islamophobia existed then. And I was a new Muslim and I was covering, and we had this international relations class. And my classmate was Libyan American. And at this time, it was like most of the Libyans were in exile. And our professor was really awesome. And every time he would talk about things, like he would always say, like, they were between Iraq and a hard place. And we would look at each other and we'd say, are they talking about Jordan? Because, it's just, so, yeah, some folks got the joke. But we were really passionate, but it was also something as young people, as young women, we were learning about the real messed up foreign policy, US foreign policy. And it was heartbreaking, but we also felt very passionate about things. This was around the time where you had the genocide against Bosnian Muslims, the Rwandan genocide, and like students were organizing. And so we felt very passionate as community college students who could do some amazing things. And at this time, before there was MSA West, we had the best MSA. So I will say that, I will stand by that, De Anza Community College. So in that class, while we were very outspoken, behind us in the seats they were two skinheads, racist skinheads. And they would say ridiculous, awful, dehumanizing things about Africans, about Muslims, about people of color. And one day they called us basically, like one of the students stood up and said that we were, basically as people of color, we were fodder for the supreme people, right? And so like I would be very passionate and just check them constantly until finally the professor kicked them out of the class. One day, a Mexican-American student who was also very active. I was active in the MSA, I was active in the Black Student Union and student government, and he told me, he's like, you better watch your back because those skinheads that were in your class, they said they're gonna get that Black Muslim girl. So every day that I went to school, I felt a deep sense of threat, and that the community itself of young Muslim students, they didn't say, hey, we're gonna walk you to the car. We're gonna make sure that you get home. We're gonna stand up and maybe we're gonna make sure that these people don't come up to campus. And I felt very alone. I felt like I had to learn how to defend myself. And that was like the first time of many times where I felt I had to defend myself. And another time it included when a student misheard a joke I said and tried to pull off my scarf. Now, the two people that did stand up for me, which was an opposite time, we had an Iranian American, we called him Muslim Mike. And Muslim Mike, he was about 6'2", and he would always be like, yeah, we're gonna defend the sisters. He was like the security, he was the bouncer of our MSA. And anytime, like me and the other co-president, so it was another Libyan American, we were co-presidents, and anything that we needed, he was like, I will do what you sisters have to say. So we were like the co-presidents, and he was just like, just let me know what you need to do. And we were like, okay, Mike, you got to pick up those things. We got to hang this up, So he was great. He respected our leadership, and he also stood by me when I had that incident, when that young man tried to pull off my scarf. Now, 25 years later, being in the spotlight, we know that under the pressure cooker of anti-Muslim, not just bigotry, not just interpersonal, not just violence, but structural violence, under surveillance, under the state, under the most powerful leader in this country, like our executive office, expressing anti-Muslim sentiment, that Muslim women have been in the forefront. And whether, like, we've been very visible, we've been very vocal. and sometimes the most visible and vocal Muslims when they've been under threat. And some people that I know personally, right? Like when Linda Sarsour her life was threatened, I very rarely heard anyone say, we're gonna make sure we have 24-hour protection. She had to get that outside. And it didn't come from us as a community, right? And so that really stuck to me because I'm also, like, as I became Muslim in the early 90s, right, at the same time, the other group besides Muslim Mike, who's a Shiite, Iranian American, when that brother tried to pull off, that non-Muslim man tried to pull off my scarf, the other people that stood up for me were people in the Nation of Islam. And that was the tradition, that they took care of their women, that they made sure that their women were safe. And in fact, in many places of people coming from that tradition, they still do their own community security. And they try to, whether they'd agreed with me philosophically, Aqidah-wise, like I believe in Tawheed, they have different beliefs, but they really tried to make sure, like if I would go to a certain area, we're gonna walk you to your car, we're gonna make sure that you're safe. And so, and many times being in the public sphere under that type of threat, not only would we get what I'd see sisters like Linda and Ilhan, Representative Ilhan, be under threat, but other Muslims would take jabs at them, questioning their Islam. Rashida Tlaib was one where they questioned her Islam for using language. Whether we agree with the language or not, it's our duty to respect, like to protect each other, right? And there have been moments where whether we're online or in public, where we do protect each other. And so, thinking about my own personal experience of being in the forefront, of having Islamophobes, and sometimes even under this pressure where you have different Muslims as they try to gain certain favor, where they may align themselves with people that do not like Muslims. And so, how do we stand up under multiple layers of threats, under the outside pressure, outside threats, where Muslim women their faith is dismissed, their faith is disparaged, and we all know that that exists. And these women are saying, like, no, Islam doesn't oppress me. But then you'll see different posts, whole articles that are arguing for that level of oppression, the very thing that we're arguing against, the very thing that we're challenging. And that Muslim women, despite whatever reception that they receive in the Muslim community, love our ummah so much and care about our generations to come, care about the youth, that they still put themselves at risk, even if they don't get the same reward, return back, welcome, or defense. Another example that I've seen, whether it's internalized Islamophobia, is that whole, like, don't make any waves. And then when Muslim women do make waves of siding with those who are against us, who don't want to afford Muslims rights. Some of those examples we see may be taking certain texts or comments out of line and making other commentary, writing articles. Some people may even build careers off of policing and correcting Muslim women. So I wanted to kind of focus in on that. So if you could see, like, I'm kind of honing in on, like, what have we internalized? Islamophobia has made us our worst enemies. And that what we can do, whether it's in our own personal sphere, is make sure that we don't attack each other, because in many ways in this system, our lowest hanging fruit, that's what we go after, and it's each other. And it's not fair, and it actually harms us. So how can we address some of these issues? One is if we see something wrong, now there's 3 steps. So we know, like, that hadith, right? Everybody says it. What is it? Can we do it? Like, if you see something wrong, you change it with your hand, or you speak against it, or you
know it in your heart.
Yeah, you hate it in your heart. Now, obviously, if we just hate it in our heart, it's just the weakest of faith, like that's like we could do a lot more. But what we can do is, if we see a Muslim woman who's in the front lines, even if we don't necessarily agree with everything about them, we can at least make dua for them. Because we know there's hasad. We also know being public, there's people that don't want to see that. They don't want to see their full humanity for their faith. People don't want to recognize our humanity because of our race, because of the color of our skin. People don't want to recognize our humanity because we're different than them. And so we need to really make sure that we keep those who have the courage to utilize their talents to go into the public sphere and to make a difference. Keep them in your dua. Please keep me in your dua too. The second thing is, if we see somebody under attack, we can vouch for them, because really, like, whether you see in certain rubrics on social media, just when you see people disparage them, giving a kind word, many of us do feel alone, no matter how big of our platform. It really hurts especially when it's internal. Some of us can deal with this external threat, but when it's in our own community, has internalized it and deploy those, like, whether you called, what are some of the names that we've been called? There's some, like, call us the Muslim mean girls. We've been called that by, some Muslims that have internalized Islamophobia. There's a lot of, like, disparaging terms towards whether we're in progressive spaces, whether we are, even if we're in progressive spaces, we may not be considered progressive enough because we cover. So we're under attack from many, many different angles. But I'm sure you may hear certain things in conversations. And so what you can do in your interpersonal life is understand the work that many of the Muslim women leaders are doing, what they're trying to do, and to remind, especially internally within the Muslim community, of what we're aiming for, what we're trying to achieve, and that we may differ in methodology, but really, having husna dhan, having a good thought on what we're trying to accomplish, as opposed to just focusing on the negative, on our shortcomings. Really, there's considered like a high bar for Muslim women to speak on any issue. So for example, you may have a Muslim woman be a psychologist, and she's speaking on Islamic psychology, which is part of her training. And then some people say, how dare she speaks up? She is not an alima. She did not finish at the University of Medina. Meantime, the same brother will write a paper on Islamic psychology and social work and has no social work background. So it's understanding, like, for us to stand up, we have to also have an understanding of, what does oppression look like? How do we talk about it? How do we address some of these wrongs? And so I think the important step is to be able to recognize what is Islamophobic, to recognize when somebody's deploying Islamophobia, whether they're Muslim or not, because that happens many times. How people may deploy misogyny to police Muslim women. And then to think about ways and strategies that we can counter that. For Muslim women, just like for myself, when I was at De Anza College 25 years ago, there's no way that I would have survived as a Muslim student without people supporting me. And it's similarly for Muslim leaders, we are the people that we connect with. It's not about the followers, it's what we do together. And some may have like a more like a vocal platform, but our platform is only as meaningful as the people that we're with. And so whether somebody has 300,000 followers, we still need to be connected with our community. And we need our community to speak to us if we're being oppressive too. If we are being wrong, reach out to us. You stand up for us when you connect with us and correct our course in a nice way. I appreciate it in a nice way. But sometimes, even when it's harsher, and it's like, Margari, what you did was wrong. Maybe you should have done that in the DMs rather than public. But the kind reminders and those du'as, that really helps. So what I'm asking for for you all in the audience is to be with us in this work. Become leaders yourselves. Speak against injustice. Speak against any lies that are made, any things that are meant to silence and harm and undermine Muslim women's leadership. And I'm sure that Zahra has so many more powerful examples. I would say the final thing is like the ways we can hold each other. It's really deep in our tradition, and Muslim women taking that forefront has always been part of our tradition. And so, we have to really consider that it is really part of our duty to uphold one another and to support those who are upholding truth and justice. Thank you.